Today, we are back in New York City to try a Michelin-starred Korean steakhouse called Cote. So please come along with us as we try some of their different cuts of steak, taste some of the different side dishes, sample some decadent A5 Wagyu, and of course try some of their different cocktails to see if this spot is truly worth the hype and answer if it's the best steakhouse in New York City. Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are back in the Flatiron District in New York City to try out a Korean steakhouse called Cote. Now just recently I reviewed the cocktail bar in the basement of this restaurant called Undercoat, and we really enjoyed it. In fact, I will put a link to that video down below. I've been trying to get a reservation to the upstairs restaurant Cote for some time, but this place has been really tough to get into. However, finally we were able to snag a seat, and today is the day. Now for a little background on Cote, the New York location of Cote was opened in 2017 by Simon Kim. Since then, it has garnered a lot of accolades. It is not only the only Korean steakhouse to get a Michelin star, but the only steakhouse in New York to currently have one. It is also ranked very highly on many lists, including being rated as the best steakhouse in New York City by World's 101 Best Steak Restaurants, which is high praise indeed considering the amount of competition it faces in a city with so many great steakhouses. As a result of all this hype, as I mentioned earlier, reservations at Cote are really hard to get. Additionally, one issue with the reservation structure makes it even trickier. So stay tuned till the end of this video when I go over my positives and negatives, because I will address this issue as well as give you some tips on grabbing one of those coveted reservations. Also, I will give you some other options to try Cote steak even if you can't get a reservation, and will answer if, in our opinion, Cote lives up to that Michelin star hype and if it truly is the best steakhouse in New York City. Now I'm going to do this video a bit different. We will be reviewing the bar experience first, then the dining room experience. The reason for this is that many restaurants, especially steakhouses, have a bar that you can sit at and get cocktails and full meal service. However, it's usually first come first serve and a bit more casual, so it's perfect if maybe you want to grab some lunch, a lighter dinner, can't get a reservation for dinner, or you just want a more casual experience overall. Also, many really good restaurants, especially Michelin star ones, have upped their cocktail game over the last few years. In fact, they've gotten so good that sometimes they can compete with standalone cocktail bars. A few examples of this are Hawksmoor and Altair, to just name a few. Now, while neither of these spots are Michelin star restaurants, both of them have drink programs that are so good that sometimes I go to those spots just for cocktails alone. So if you are just planning to swing in for drinks, or you want to grab a more casual dinner, or you actually want to have the full experience, either way, we will have you covered in this video. With that being said, let's head on over there, and as we do, let's see what people are saying about Cote online. Now on Yelp, they have a rating of 4.2 out of 2,000 reviews, and on Google, they have a 4.6 out of 3,843 reviews, so those are pretty good. Some of the positive reviews mention an amazing experience, the food was incredible, rich, flavorful, and that they also enjoyed the atmosphere and service, but they especially talk about that experience. Then for the negative reviews, several people mentioned that they felt the food isn't worth the price, especially focusing on it being too expensive. Then one mentions that they felt it wasn't sanitary, the way the staff and the people who cooked the food handled it. And then finally someone mentioned that it was too hot in there. Well, are the positive reviews true or the negative? Stay tuned, we're going to head on in and find out, and then we'll let you know our thoughts on it at the end of this video. Now that we're at the bar, let's take a look at the menu here. And I actually completely forgot to film the menu while I was at the bar, so this footage is from when we were at the table. And I really like this menu. It has such a cool vintage vibe to it. First, we have a table of contents, which I really like. That way you can just skip to the page you want, whether it be cocktails or beer or no ABV remedies, which is what we have right here. Now that is a little unusual to me having it at the beginning. I would prefer it at the end, but to each their own. Then we have the wine lists, the reserve wine lists, and then finally we get to their cocktail list. And of course, we have 4 martinis at the top. They specialize in their martinis, and they also have a nice list of some classics. Of course, these are variations on classics, their own unique spin on them. Of course, they have reserve cocktails like Undercoat downstairs, and then finally we get to their signature. And they have about 6 signature cocktails. So with the spins on classics and some of the other drinks, this takes them over 12 cocktails. And you know I like a larger drink list. I prefer that. Of course, then we have beer and soju here. It's a Korean steakhouse. If they didn't have soju, I would be shocked. And then finally, even here at the end, we have some after dinner drinks. So definitely a decent amount of drinks, especially for a restaurant and a steakhouse. So for our first round, my wife got the Bopper, which is a penicillin variation. And unfortunately, it seemed to do none of the things well that the original penicillin did. However, it also did nothing new or interesting that you would hope for from a variation. In fact, the new ingredients such as the Saint Germain were actually drowned out by the Scotch, but the Scotch was still not that strong or impactful, and the ginger bite was weak. So basically, you ended up with a somewhat blah, boring penicillin variation that was good, but forgettable. Additionally, they didn't give me the correct garnish. They gave me a lemon wedge. That's okay for a dive bar, but not for a Michelin-starred restaurant. This drink was supposed to come with candied ginger, which I confirmed when I saw several other people get it with the candied ginger. Also, they didn't serve it on a big clear block of ice, which was disappointing. Now, I know this might seem a bit nitpicky, but at a restaurant with Cote's reputation and with the $24 price tag this drink had, I really expected better, and Cote let me down. Now, for my drink, I got the Cote Old Fashioned, and I have to say, it was the delicious Old Fashioned variation. The split base added a nice little change from the rye and the bourbon, and the Oleo Saccharum added just a little bit of brightness. Now, these weren't really extreme differences. The differences were actually very subtle, but it was still a delicious Old Fashioned that was just ever so slightly different. I would definitely order it again. Also, I was really happy to see that they did use a clear ice cube for my drink, although I do wish that they either use a smaller glass or a bigger cube, because aesthetically it did look a little off with that teeny little cube in the big glass. But overall, an excellent drink. So here we are at our table, and you can see it has the heated grill right there in the middle, getting nice and hot, and that's where our steaks are going to be cooked. And then, of course, we're also going to have a bunch of other food brought. But let's see what we're going to order, and so let's take a look at the menu here. So up here at the top, you have the seafood part of the menu under Jewels of the Sea, with such things as shrimp cocktails and caviar service. Then you have your shareable appetizers, and finally your tasting menus with the Butcher's Feast with 4 cuts of meat and the steak omakase with 10 cuts of meat. Then of course you have your a la carte cuts such as ribeyes, New York strip, etc. And then finally you have your a la carte sides such as the Wagyu paella. Then on the back of the menu here, I really like the way they have it set up with the different cuts of meat explained and the different cows that the cuts come from. So that's super cool. Now we decided to order the Butcher's Feast. It's $78 per person, and it gives you 4 selected cuts of meat along with Korean sides, which include scallion salad, savory egg souffle, and 2 stews with rice, plus vanilla soft serve for dessert. So that's a major bang for your buck there. We also decided to order a 5th cut of meat, the Japanese A5 Wagyu, and that was $32 extra each for 1 ounce a person, but we feel like it's totally worth it, and we can't wait for our food to arrive. Now, as we waited for our food, our second round arrived, and I ordered the High Hats. Unfortunately, this drink was not well balanced. While I did get a little bit of the notes of the tequila and some faint hints of the mango, both were overwhelmed by that citrus. What it really needed was more mango and definitely more sweetener to balance it out. Also, while it is served in a big cube, that is only because I requested it. They normally also serve it on regular ice. Finally, Once again, what's up with that lame garnish? Extremely disappointing for a restaurant of this caliber. I have to wonder if that is the actual garnish that goes with this drink or if they ran out and just slapped a lime on it. Overall, I would say this was probably my least favorite drink of the night, and I wouldn't order it again. Now, my wife got the Kings of Manhattan from the reserve part of the menu, and she loved it. It was really a delicious Manhattan variation. The differences were subtle, but still there. You get that little bit of smoke from the stouning, and then some earthiness from that vetiver. So, while not a huge departure from regular Manhattan, the differences were enough to make it delicious, and I would definitely order it myself in future. Well, it looks like our meal is here, and of course we have the literal butcher's block with our meat on it. Then he's also going to give us our first round of sides along with that. First, we have a beef consommé, or you could also call it a beef bone broth, which is kind of like a starter to drink before everything else. Then we have our other sides, including some scallion salad. Then some lettuce leaves, which are not meant to be eaten by themselves, but you use them to wrap some of the meat and rice and other sides in. Think of vegetable tortilla for a taco. At least that's what I've been told. While I love Korean food, unfortunately I'm not super knowledgeable about it. Then we have these banchans, which are different pickled vegetables. And then finally this fermented soy paste, which can be used like a sauce for the steak. Now doubling back to the banchans, or the fermented vegetables, we have some cauliflower there. Then we have some daikon radish, and then finally we have this okra. So we have 3, but I think we're gonna get some more with the next round of sides. So after he laid out the first round of sides for us, he then went over the different cuts of meat that would be cooked for us. First, we have the hanger steak right here. Then we have that ribeye, which is 45 days dry aged. Then for our third round, we have American Wagyu. Then for our final round, we have this marinated Galbi steak. However, in between, we get that Japanese A5 Wagyu, which is what I've been looking forward to the most. This is the highlight of all of them. After this, he left us, and we waited for the server who actually cooks the steak to arrive. Meanwhile, let's try this bone broth, or consommé as they call it. Wow, this was delicious. It's much better than I expected. So flavorful but not too rich or greasy. The perfect way to start our meal. Well, it looks like our server is here and we're about to get started with our first cut of steak. Now, like our other server mentioned earlier, we are starting with the hanger steak. When I asked, he informed me that the hanger steak isn't dry aged but is wet aged. I also thought that this is pretty cool. She is using a little bit of dry aged beef fat to make sure the steak doesn't stick on the grill. They actually do this periodically throughout the cooking process. Now, on the grill the steak goes, and then of course she's going to salt it again, which is great to see. I never like an undersalted steak, so I'm glad that she puts salt in it, not just on the butcher board, but also when it's on the grill. Then of course we have some mushrooms and some of these little things that are called rice cakes. Now, I decided to get my steak cooked medium rare, but my wife is requesting it medium, so hers will be on the grill a little bit longer than mine. Well, it looks like it's time to try that hanger steak. And wow, I have to say it smells delicious. And after my first bite, it was really good. Really nice crust on there, perfectly seasoned, tender and juicy. I will say the only thing is it's probably leaning a bit more toward rare than medium rare. But I have no issue with that. I still really enjoy it. And if it really bothers me, I can throw a few pieces back on the grill. But that is definitely, I would say, more rare than medium rare. Still, despite that, we both really enjoyed our first round of meat. It was excellent. So far, so good. So it looks like our second round of sides has arrived, and there's really just so much stuff. This is really such a huge amount of sides and such a filling meal that I don't know if we're going to be able to finish all of it. Now, our server is explaining everything to us here. Of course, we have several different kinds of kimchi here, and also some more banchans. You can see classic kimchi right there, and then some pickled radishes that he's setting down right there. Of course, then we have all of our different kinds of Korean stews here. This one I think is a more vegetable one. Then you have your beef one over there. Of course, we have that amazing looking egg souffle, which I can't wait to try. Then these pickled radishes again, and some of those okra. Of course, we have rice as well to tie it all together. But like I said, I'm really looking forward to that egg souffle. Everything looks so good. And also, I really am looking forward to trying this beef stew right here. Now I have to say, this meal moves really fast. We'd barely taken a few bites of our hanger steak before the other sides arrived, and now we are already moving on to the next round, the ribeye. Now the ribeye is 45-day dry aged in-house. You can actually see all the dry aged steak downstairs through a window that looks right into their meat locker, which is located right next to Undercoat. I can't wait to try this one out. However, I better turn my attention back to this hanger steak because this ribeye is going to be done before you know it. Of course, just as I say this mushroom is finished, and I have to give it a try. Wow, I gotta say, this is delicious. Super juicy, definitely a lot of umami flavors going on here. Don't sleep on the mushroom. Now, this rice cake, I also enjoyed it. I recommend dipping it in the sauce though, since it doesn't have a huge amount of flavor on its own. Well, it looks like the ribeye is all done, so let's dig into it. And I have to say, just looking at it, it looks a little bit more medium than medium rare, so it seems like on the last one, they missed the mark slightly under, and this one slightly over. Now, I have to say that I'm also a little bit disappointed. I don't really get a very strong dry aged flavor, especially for 45 days. Also, while this is delicious, I would like it to be seasoned a bit more. It seems like it's not seasoned enough this time. It's also not quite as juicy as I would expect for a ribeye, so I'm just slightly disappointed with this one. However, it really shows that everyone can have a different opinion because this one was one of my wife's favorite cuts. Of course, she used the lettuce wraps, rice, and some of the other sides with it, so that may be why. I actually am trying not to. However, I decided to give those a try on this one since I felt like it needs a bit more flavor. And I will say, altogether with everything, the wraps, etc., it is delicious. So it looks like that's the way to go for the ribeye. And just like that, we are on to the next cut of meat, the American Wagyu. And as it cooks, let's take another look at some of those sides. And one of our favorites was the egg souffle. It was so well done. It had a really nice savory flavor while not being too salty. It also had a great texture. I could see a dish like this getting dry if not executed correctly, but this was perfectly creamy and fluffy. Just a really good side to go with this steak. Then I really enjoyed the banchans. This one here was probably my favorite. They were pickled radishes and they weren't too spicy, but they had just a little bit of a kick to them and a really nice tart flavor. My wife, on the other hand, preferred the pickled okra as her favorite banchan. However, I hate okra, so I didn't even try it. Now, my favorite side dish was this stew. They give you two stews, and the server said it was the spicier one of the two, but I didn't feel it was actually that spicy, and it was so rich and flavorful with those chunks of beef in there that it was well worth the spice. I actually added a little rice with it, which went really well. Overall, this was just fantastic. The other stew was good as well, and I believe it didn't have meat in it, so it's a good vegetarian option. However, I preferred the kimchi stew of the two. Well, it looks like our American Wagyu is all finished cooking, and she is cutting it up for us. And in my opinion, it is cooked a perfect medium rare. It also has a really nice crust on it. Flavor-wise, it wasn't quite as fatty as I expected for Wagyu, but it is an American Wagyu, not Japanese, so that's probably why. However, I still thought it was delicious, perfectly salted, juicy, and tender. Now, my wife preferred the ribeye to this one, so to each their own. It shows opinions can differ, even in the same meal. Then, for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to try it with the sauce. And it's a really good sauce. This sauce is fermented and garlicky. However, I have to say that honestly, most of these cuts of meat I want to eat by themselves, with the exception maybe of the prime rib. And this one was no exception. I wanted to have it by itself. So after trying it with the sauce, I went back to just eating it plain. So as we finish our American Wagyu, it looks like it's the time we've been waiting for, Japanese A5 Wagyu time. What I really like is that they also changed the grill grate and even washed the inside of the grill before they cooked the A5 Wagyu. They didn't tell me this, but I assume that's because the A5 Wagyu is such a special cut of meat and it's also very expensive, and you really don't want any other flavors interfering with the flavor of the Wagyu, such as some of the flavors from the other 3 cuts we've had so far. They want you to only taste the Japanese A5 Wagyu, and I appreciate that attention to detail. So watching them cook this cut, you notice that they move it around more than the other cuts, and they turn it a lot, and that's because of the high fat content. Not only does it need to be cooked very quickly so that the fat doesn't burn, but you also have to constantly turn it so that it cooks evenly and so that the fat doesn't render too much. So they are paying constant attention to it. Now, the moment we have been waiting for, to try the Japanese A5 Wagyu. So to start, just looking at this cut, they nailed the cooking. It's a perfect medium rare. They also achieved a really nice crust with the fat being rendered perfectly. But how does it taste? Well, I have to say this tastes incredible. It's perfectly salted, so juicy, tender, and fatty. I've heard many people describe it like a beef butter, and that's definitely to a degree how it tastes. It's rich and decadent and has this juicy fattiness to it that melts in your mouth, giving you this delicious, very concentrated beef flavor. It makes every other cut of beef we've had tonight seem tough in comparison. This is one of the best cuts of meat I've ever had. It's completely worth the upcharge. If you come to Cote and you get the butcher's block, I highly recommend you get the Japanese A5 Wagyu add-on. It's completely worth the price. Be warned though, it's really rich. You actually don't need that much of it to enjoy it. In some ways, with this cut, less is more. So it's time for our final cut of meat, and they gave us this marinated Korean galbi, and it's marinated in like a Korean sauce that's kind of sweet. And so they mentioned that that's why they saved it for last, because it is really sweet. So it's almost like your dessert steak. And I have to say, just the smell coming off the grill is incredible. It smells delicious. So hopefully the taste lives up to the smell. I can't wait to try it. So the Korean galbi is now done, and not only does it smell amazing, but it's cooked perfectly. You can see the caramelization from the sugar and the marinade, which created this delicious crust. Not only is it tender and juicy, but it is also such a flavor bomb. It's sweet, but you also taste some garlic and spices, which complement that sweetness perfectly. then just a little bit of saltiness to add a nice savory element to it and tie it all together. Other than the A5, this is probably my favorite cut of meat tonight. Now I also grabbed some of the egg souffle and made myself a Korean take on steak and eggs here, and I have to say they went really well together. I also decided to try it with this paste here. They actually go really well. The saltiness from the paste balances the sweetness really nicely. However, I still prefer this steak on its own. That's how good the flavors are from that marinade. I haven't had very many Galbis at all over the years, so I'm no expert on them. However, of the ones I've tried, this one is the best one I've had. So as we were finishing up our meal, we decided to split one last cocktail and we ordered the Casino. And boy am I glad we did. This drink was fantastic. You get those nice crisp botanicals from the gin, combined with the herbal sweetness from the maraschino, then that's balanced by the fruity tart sweetness from the verjus, and then everything's brought together by the bitter citrus from the orange bitters. Bright, crisp, refreshing, and balanced. This was an incredible drink and a perfect martini variation if you feel like a martini but want to try something different. It was my favorite drink of the night and I will be ordering it again. Well, it looks like our dessert has arrived, and I've had this dessert before at Undercoat. It's this really delicious vanilla ice cream, so creamy, so smooth, and then they put this salted soy caramel on top of it that just is the perfect accompaniment. It perfectly combines the sweet and savory and just, man, it's so good. I could drink this stuff. They should bottle it and sell it. That's how good it is on this ice cream. Overall, it's the perfect way to end the meal. Well, it looks like our bill is here, and full disclosure, I actually paid separately for the 2 drinks we had at the bar, but still, this is a pretty good price for what we got. 3 drinks, the 2 Butcher's Feast, sparkling water, and the addition of the Wagyu. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the value for money we got. But now, let's head on out, and we will go over the positive, neutral, and negatives of this steakhouse and bar. So for the positives, we have dining experience, food, bang for a buck, and then finally service. And starting with dining experience, one of the most enjoyable parts of eating at Cote is having the steak cooked right in front of you. Watching the staff cook each cut and hearing it sizzle and watching it caramelize while you get the wonderful aromas adds a level of interaction most steakhouses don't offer. It turns the meal into something a bit more fun and engaging, almost like you're a part of the cooking process without having to lift a finger. So that really impressed me. Then the food. The beef at Cote is excellent. However, beyond the beef, the selections of banchans is delicious. The other sides, such as the egg souffle and the stews, were delicious. And really, all of them elevate the experience and make the meal feel complete. Then you have bang for your buck. The price of the meat itself is about what you pay at other high-end steakhouses. And in terms of sheer quantity, you don't get a huge amount. It's 8 ounces without the Wagyu add-on. And I was looking around, it was hard to compare prices. However, with some research, I calculated for those cuts, most other steakhouses would charge anywhere from 50 to 58 bucks. However, what really pushes the value here is everything that comes with it. The variety, quality, and amount of sides, the banchan, egg souffle, stews, all the accompaniments make the meal feel far more comprehensive than just paying for steak alone. They are what gives Cote its edge when it comes to overall value. Other steakhouses would charge far more for the same amount of food. Finally, the service was good. While not the best service I have had, they were still attentive and explained all the details of the cuts of meat, the sides, and the cooking process for us. Then for neutrals, we had atmosphere, pre-batching, and the cocktails. So for atmosphere, I really found the atmosphere of Cote to be sleek and modern, but it didn't feel particularly special or distinct compared to other Korean steakhouses. It's certainly not bad, just not as memorable as the interiors of some of the more traditional steakhouses, which I personally prefer, like Hawksmoor, Gage, and Tollner. That being said, some reviewers feel differently, and it's fair to acknowledge that the layout and design are limited by the need for tabletop grills, which naturally shapes the overall vibe. Then we have pre-batching. Most of Cote's cocktails are pre-batched. That's just the trend nowadays, so not much more to say there. And then the final neutral is the cocktails themselves. The cocktail program at Cote has some high points, but it also shows some serious cracks, especially for a Michelin-star restaurant. The decision not to use large clear ice cubes on certain drinks, as well as mistakes with garnishes and or overly simple garnishes, made the presentations feel underwhelming. These little details need to be better at a Michelin star restaurant, especially when you are paying $24 for a cocktail. I mean, come on, a lemon wedge? Seriously? I've gotten better garnishes at a dive bar. Also, flavor-wise, the two shaken cocktails were the main disappointments, one being rather blah despite being a variation of an all-time great cocktail, and the other one lacking balance. However, this section stays neutral overall because there were clear highlights too. The martini variation was fantastic. I still think about that drink, and both the old-fashioned and the Manhattan, while not bold reinterpretations of those drinks, were genuinely delicious and well executed. This then brings us to the negatives, and that's the bar experience and limitations within the reservation system. Let's start first with the bar experience. The bar setup at Cote is one of the more noticeable weak spots. There's no actual seating at the bar, and its placement directly between two busy dining rooms makes the area feel hectic rather than relaxing. Even though you can order food there, the environment isn't really conducive to enjoying a drink, let alone settling for multiple rounds or a full meal. It ends up feeling more like a pass-through zone than a proper bar experience, which is disappointing for a restaurant of this caliber. Remember earlier I mentioned an issue with the reservation system that you really needed to know about? Well, we're going to talk about it now. When you go to make a reservation, Cote only allows parties of 2 during the first or last seating. That's 5 p.m. or 11 p.m. I believe it's 12 a.m. on Saturdays. This is a major inconvenience if you're trying to come for a date night or a standard evening dinner. Many people don't get off work in time to make a 5 p.m. seating, and 11 p.m. or midnight is far too late for most diners to realistically enjoy a full meal. The policy makes an already difficult reservation even tougher, and in our opinion is a policy they need to change. That being said, as promised, let me give you some tips to securing that coveted table and some alternative ways to try Cote Steak if despite your best efforts you could not snag a reservation. So Cote allows you to book 30 days in advance, counting the day you are on. This means you have to really plan ahead. Additionally, reservations open up at 10 a.m., so you need to be ready because they go quick, especially for parties of 2 people. So when you go to make the reservation, keep refreshing the page, and as soon as the day opens up, quickly snag it. Don't hesitate and make sure you are logged into Resi and have all your information ready to go. They don't hold them for you while you're on the page, and I actually had a reservation snatched out from under me several times in the 30 seconds I delayed or in the time it took me to log into my account when I was accidentally logged out. I also suggest being flexible to going several different days in case you don't get the first one. You will have the practice then and can snag the next day when it becomes available much easier. Now, if despite your best efforts you still can't get a seat, then I recommend going downstairs to Undercoat. I will link my full review of this spot, but they serve some of the same steak, it comes from the same kitchen, as upstairs, and the cocktail program is actually better in my opinion. Now, for your last resort, you can stand at the bar upstairs. Personally, I would just walk over to Hawksmoor at this point, which is close by. I actually did a review of them too, and I will link that as well. However, if you absolutely must try this spot and your legs feel strong, you can order from the menu at the bar. The only difference is like Undercoat, it comes already cooked, so no things such as the butcher's feast at the bar. Moving on to addressing the reviews, overall our experience was positive. We didn't experience any of the negatives in the reviews, and as for it being too expensive, we found Cote to actually be good value for the money when compared to other high-end steakhouses, especially considering that they gave you a bunch of included sides that you didn't have to pay extra for. So now to answer the 2 questions I posed at the beginning. In our opinion, does this live up to the Michelin star hype, and is it truly the best steakhouse in New York City? Well, the short answer to the first one is yes. The experience is just so cool and different and so unique, being a Korean steakhouse experience where they cook the meat right in front of you, but it's the high-end version of that, using dry-aged, high-quality cuts of meat. For that reason, we think that definitely lives up to the Michelin star. That being said, it's not without its flaws, and this brings us to the question, do we think it's the best steakhouse in New York City? Well, I will say this right away to start, that you have to like Korean food, and you have to like Korean barbecue to like this steakhouse. If you don't like Korean food, then I would give this place a pass, and I would stick to one of the more American-style steakhouses. However, me and my wife, we love Korean food, so this was not an issue for us, but that's just something to keep in mind. Also, as a disclaimer, what I'm going to say is just our opinion. While we try to give balanced and thought-out reasons for why we come to these opinions, it's still largely subjective. We fully understand that aspects of the experience we might give more weight, others might not, and vice versa. So with all that being said, it's a bit tricky of a question to answer because Cote is not a traditional American steakhouse. It's different. So it's kind of like comparing apples and oranges, and because of this, we put the most weight in the aspects that are more comparable while also factoring the uniqueness that Cote brings to the table. In our opinion, if you compare the meat, the cocktails and drinks, desserts, sides, and overall bar experience, we felt Cote wasn't the best steakhouse in New York City. Now don't get me wrong, it is still one of the best, and it's still fantastic. However, in our opinion, the meat, while very good, was not any better than what I've had at some of the other places such as Hawksmoor, Delmonico's, Gage and Tollner, and in fact I will say that the ribeye was actually just a little bit disappointing compared to what I've had in some other steakhouses. As for the cocktail program and the bar experience, multiple other steakhouses have much better ones than this, so once again they lost in that category. Now I will say that the overall experience is really cool, seeing the steak being cooked right in front of you, and the bang for your buck of having all those sides definitely puts Cote ahead of many of the other steakhouses in that area. However, I just think taking everything all together and looking at it as the sum of all its parts, those advantages while making it possibly the most fun steakhouse in the city still were not able to put it above some of the other heavy hitters. So this brings us to the final thoughts. Overall, we really enjoyed Cote. If you are someone who lives in the city, then you have to visit at least once. That being said, I don't think I will come back very often. Maybe when we have guests in town. Other than that, probably every few years, once in a blue moon. This is due to not just the difficulty of getting a table, but also the limit on parties of 2, which just makes it super inconvenient. I think it would be different if they had a better bar setup and then we could just walk in. For instance, I regularly meet up at the bar in Hawksmoor to grab drinks with friends and maybe grab a burger or a steak. However, I haven't been to the dining room there in almost 2 years, so it shows the importance, at least for us, of having a solid casual bar option at a spot. That being said, I will return to Undercoat regularly, and I can always sample some of the same steaks downstairs there. Now, if you're a tourist visiting the city and you like both steak and Korean barbecue, then this place is a must visit. I definitely recommend it. Even if you have to grab a super late or super early spot, you're on vacation. You have a little more flexibility. Plus, it's a really nice area and you can always grab drinks before or after at Undercoat, Clemente Bar, or Hawksmoor, to name a few spots in the area that have really good drinks. So definitely put this on your list when you visit New York City for a really cool experience. Well, those are our final thoughts on Cote. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please let us know what you think or if you have any questions or thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, subscribe, and that bell icon so you get notified of new videos, and most importantly, always drink responsibly. Thank you for watching, and please join us again on Boozy Explorers.